right now, I am, I believe, joined by Parker Molloy, who's editor at large at Media Matters. Incredible writer. If you haven't been following Parker's work, you absolutely should. Parker, thank you so much for joining us at this late hour.
Thanks so much for having me.
Okay, so let's do a little like real news after dark stuff, right? You know, like there's a lot of uncertainty right now. And, chances are the picture is not going to become much clearer over the next hour. And so we have, I think a lot of kind of unresolved questions to address. And I think some of them I could think of no better person to talk to than you for. When we were in this position in 2016, right after Donald Trump won, as everybody remembers, there was this massive surge in the news media, right, to kind of shore up and defend the necessity of the free press, right, the necessity of truth-telling in the age of Trump, right? Washington Post changed its kind of slogan to "Democracy dies in darkness." Like this was very much kind of the atmosphere in the wake of Trump's election. Things have kind of played out a little differently than I think we expected, or these outlets kind of led us to believe. And so, we were told that in this new kind of era, it would be more important than ever to kind of be watching the Trump administration, watching what is happening in Washington, D.C. But you've been watching the watchers over the past 4 years. And so I guess I wanted to kind of ask, how's the news media been doing?
Well, it's been a mixed bag. I think that, yeah, as you were saying, there was this sense right after Trump's election in 2016, the news media will defend us, they will protect us, they will they will fight lies with truth. But I think that one thing that happened almost immediately, it seemed like there was this tendency to kind of just sort of start grading Trump on a curve to make him seem like a normal president. And that's something that we just, I think we all kind of saw this happen during the 2016 campaign, where people were making excuses for him. They were saying, "Oh, well, he's new at this whole politics thing." They kept talking about a pivot that would never come. All of these things that just kind of pushed aside the fact that he wasn't really running on concrete policies that made sense. He would say vague promises like that he was going to build a wall and that he was going to have Mexico pay for it. But when it came down to things like his plan to eliminate the entire national debt in 8 years, when he talked about that with the Washington Post, for instance, during the 2016 campaign, there was this sort of he confused budget deficits with trade deficits, which is a really weird mistake to make, and it's a very big mistake. I mean, if you're talking about paying down the entire national debt, so that was one of those things that I feel like a more seasoned candidate, or a more someone that people considered more of a politician going into it, would have called him on at the time. And what happened was, when he won the election, there was this. I had kind of hoped that they would go, "Okay, well, you might not have known what you were doing, but we're throwing you in there, putting your, we're going to hold your feet to the fire." But it seemed like we kind of saw things graded on a curve, in the sense that Obama would be criticized for, there were all sorts of weird minor scandals, like the time he saluted with a coffee cup in his hand, or that he was trying to quit smoking when he first took office. These things were scandals in the world of not just right-wing media, but mainstream news outlets would write about this stuff as well. And if Trump were to be held to those same standards, we would not have. It would have been just an unending series of scandals. But instead, for instance, 5 days after he took office, the New York Times wrote a story about how he was fitting into things. He was getting used to the position, and it was buried somewhere. I think it was somewhere around the 25th paragraph of this long feature that said, "Oh yeah, he's still using an old cell phone that is hackable, and that people are really worried about with security concerns." Which, coming off of an election where a big issue was data management, just seems like they kind of threw in the towel on that one. And that's one of those examples that really stuck out. And I feel like it's been 4 years of a lot of kind of making excuses for him, grading him on a curve, patting him on the back when whenever he can act like an adult for a few minutes here and there, praising his tone. So I think that's been going on, and it's been frustrating because for these 4 years I've been writing article after article saying, please don't make the same mistakes you made in 2016. Please change this for the better. That sort of thing. But
yeah. Turns out we shouldn't be holding our breath on that front. Well, I mean, I think I really like the way that you put that, right? Because there is this kind of important back and forth dynamic, which, in which, as you described, right, the media, the kind of corporate news media has sort of projected a certain image onto Trump, sort of projected certain kind of criteria, and then like molded those criteria from how they covered past elections to kind of turn the Trump presidency into something that, just based on the eye test, it very clearly is not. But there's also, as you have covered kind of extensively, there are a lot of ways that Trump himself has kind of projected onto the media, and they have adjusted to him in a way that I think is so hard to kind of really think about and wrap our heads around, because the examples that you're talking about, I know this is kind of an old point, but like, in the hyperspeed of the immediate, in our kind of, new media age, it's so easy to forget this stuff. It's so easy to become acculturated to it and acclimated to it, and in fact lose all memory of what journalism was or should have been in the past. And, you recently wrote a really great piece for Media Matters called "Trump's Closing Pitch is Based on an Avalanche of Lies, and He's Hoping Media Will Spread Them." And so I was wondering if we could kind of drill down on that, kind of talking about things the other way, right? The ways that that Trump has in fact played the media, and in fact played kind of to the media's greatest weaknesses, which have kind of amplified his own strengths.
Oh yeah. Yeah, with that piece, that was kind of that built on a lot of things that I've written before, which was how he launders information through the media. I mean, that has been that's his life. I mean, in the 80s and 90s, he would leak stories to tabloids and get them to put them on, the cover of the New York Post, with headlines like "the best sex I ever had," which is kind of a weird thing to put a real estate developer on there for. But yeah, so that I mean is classic Donald Trump, the entertainer, the businessman, the everything he was before he ran for office, and he continued that right on into the presidency. He learned very early on that he could tweet something and dictate the coverage for the rest of the day, just depending on where he sent reporters that day. I've heard from people making jokes about how he is essentially the country's assignment editor, in that he can just choose what everyone's going to talk about that day. So when he makes announces policies that he may not have any intention of actually following through on, or actually even rolling out a real policy, it's only because certain segments of the press will take the bait and run with it. For instance, before the 2018 midterms, just kind of out of nowhere, Trump said that he promised that he was going to pass a middle-class tax cut, 10% tax cut for people in the middle class. And Congress didn't know what he was talking about. They were out of session until after the election. And they're kind of like, what are you, what are you talking about? And then they had to kind of reverse engineer something to be like, no, we were talking about that. And you've seen it happen a lot recently with him talking about his healthcare plan. I mean, the fact that we went into this election where the administration is trying to strike down the Affordable Care Act, which, it has some important protections in there that if you're going to get rid of it, you're going to want to put something else in there right away. He just without telling us exactly what that's going to be. And for the most part, he's been let off the hook with it. There have been a few times where journalists have tried to really hold him accountable. And I think that one time recently we saw that was in a 60 Minutes interview he did with Leslie Stahl, where she really pressed him and didn't let him move on past that point, which was great. I mean, but at the same time, if you read those questions, if you watch that interview, there weren't any hard questions there. Those were all questions he should have very easily been able to answer. And so when you look back at 4 years of the Trump presidency, the hard-hitting interviews that people look back on, Leslie Stahl, Jonathan Swan, Chris Wallace on Fox News, these things none of them were actually hard-hitting interviews. They were just interviews where they didn't let him veer off topic and go, start talking about the economy is so great, instead of actually talking about the issue he was asked about. So I think that's something that we kind of saw happen over the past few years. And going into this election, we all knew that this week was just going to be him kind of throwing everything out there, in the past couple of weeks with the big push to try to get people talking about Hunter Biden, which was a story that didn't catch on because it didn't really make sense. It wasn't clear. With Hillary Clinton, it was easy. It was her emails, her, or just her foundation. There were these really simple points that people could just go, yes, corruption, and whether it's real or not. But with the story they tried to push was a little too complicated, I think, to be effective. But yeah, so trying to get that into the mainstream, trying to get that into people's, trying to control the message going into the election. I think that for the most part, there was a lot of failures, but at the same time, it's almost like these past couple of weeks, especially, I think as the death toll from COVID has kind of piled up as this presidency has essentially started to accumulate a very visible body count. All presidencies have had a body count. It's just they're usually not people in our own lives that we see, every day. It's usually, a war or someone forgotten who, whatever the case may be. But with this, I think there's this sense of irritation on part of some journalists, which is good, which is the exact kind of thing they should have had this entire time. Just these past couple of weeks of really, really insisting that he elaborate on his plans and what he wanted to do, and to not let him dictate the conversation anymore. And my worry is that now that we've gone into election night and in watching the coverage that I've been keeping up with tonight, I think that a lot of the news outlets, the mainstream news outlets, I mostly watched CNN tonight, was they failed to really articulate where things stood. CNN had states flipping back, blue and red, based on 3% of the vote, 4% of the vote. And that's not helpful. It's treating it like entertainment, like a game. And and I think that in the coming days, there are going to be a lot of situations where we are going to need more context. We are going to need to know why there are still mail-in ballots to count, that they're not just showing up, that they're not just found ballots out of nowhere. And because we've seen how these arguments are made, whether it's talking about in 2018, where there were some battles against counting votes in Florida, in Arizona, and Georgia. Those were some big, some contested races that some of those went back to recounts. Or if you go all the way back to 2000, after what happened there. I mean, in 2000, going into the election, the thought process was that George Bush might win the popular vote but lose the Electoral College. And so his team was preparing to make a public argument saying that if he won the popular vote but lost the Electoral College, he should still be the president, because how could we possibly turn our backs on the will of the people? And really taking a public, a public relations, public opinion kind of campaign out there. But when that situation actually happened to Gore, it was more of a, gotta uphold norms and show dignity, and like all of these sorts of things that I feel like going into this, I'm feeling some sort of similarities there, in that I think that in the coming days we're going to see a lot of Trump supporters in the Trump campaign going out there and saying all of these votes that come in are fraudulent, and even if they've been sitting there for 2 weeks, but haven't been able to be counted because states had laws preventing that from happening. In Pennsylvania, there are some counties that are not even going to start counting mail-in ballots until tomorrow. Right. So we're not getting those answers right away. And I think as long as that kind of the uncertainty hangs there, it gives Trump more of an opportunity to kind of try to shape the narrative coming out in the next few days. And one thing that tends to happen is he'll say something and reporters will tend to just go, Trump says, and then whatever in a headline. Right. And it happened. He's a content factor. Yeah, exactly. It happened with the with the Mueller report when that came out and Barr released a letter. Barr put out a letter that just said everything's fine. No, he didn't find anything, and all the newspapers the next day just ran with Mueller finds no collusion. Those are all the big headlines, and it got to the point where a week or two later, Mueller had to come out with a statement and say, "You are misrepresenting what I found." And he was not one to make public statements throughout that entire investigation. But what happened there was Barr was able to shape the narrative going into it. And I worry that in the next few days, Trump is going to be able to shape the narrative about what should happen in these states. Should every ballot be counted? What is a valid, response to this? And I think that there needs to be a lot of really strong pushback. And that's why in the past few days, there have been a lot of people really begging mainstream outlets to not fall for it, to not fall into the same trap that they have so many times before. And that's what that piece was about, was just saying, what's coming, what he's going to do. You've made these mistakes in the past, but you don't have to fall for it anymore. You don't have to cave into it. When Congress doesn't act as a check on the presidency and the judiciary doesn't act as a check on the presidency, all that's left is the media. And that, I think, kind of gets overlooked. The media as a whole plays a big role in ensuring that our democracy exists. So that is something that I really hope that, I'll be pleasantly surprised in coming days, but I'm unfortunately not super optimistic about that.
Yeah, given the nature of the work that you do, I don't think anyone can blame you for not being totally optimistic. And Parker, I could honestly talk to you about this for days. Obviously, it's something that is very near and dear to both of our hearts, with you working at Media Matters and me working here at The Real News. But we do have another segment, so I just wanted to thank you so much for coming on and sharing your wisdom with us, and really appreciate you and all the important work that you do.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.